Our next plenary speaker is Cheryl Swirsky from the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease from the U.S. And she's going to address about striving for an expanded HIV prevention response, what that the future holds. Cheryl, if you want to take comments at the end, try to get it less than 30 minutes, okay? Thank you.
So good morning. I first want to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak. Secondly, want to say that I'm not going to talk about Truvada and tenofovir as PrEP. I think that, we've had a very nice discussion this morning. Other than to say that the National Institutes of Health, as Ken mentioned, are supporting several demonstration projects to look at how to implement PrEP in various settings and various populations. So, and you can see my title is not exactly what you were expecting either. I'm not going to survey the whole HIV prevention field. It's going to be hard enough to do what's coming up in PrEP specifically in the few short minutes that I have. So I retitled the presentation because, I think we are on a journey here and on a journey to hopefully eventually optimizing PrEP. As I said, we definitely are supportive of the CDC guidelines for Truvada and tenofovir use as PrEP, but we know that that doesn't work for everybody, just like there's probably not going to be one single thing in any area of prevention that's going to work well for everybody. So we're going to talk about, hopefully, the pathway, or at least as we see it at the moment, to optimize PrEP. And as you can see, I did not choose a picture of a straight road. It's likely a winding pathway. And so what I'm going to talk about are some basic principles that we, at least at the NIH, think are very important as far as our overarching principles to optimize PrEP. Where are we now? Where are we going? What are the problems that we've already experienced and that we will likely continue to experience? How to resolve those problems, so how to have a better map, if you will, to get to where we're going. And then a couple of really big picture sort of way forward things that we need to be thinking about as we move forward. So basic principles, what are they? At least we in the Prevention Sciences program at the NIH think that, as I said before, we need a variety of types of products and strategies to reach key populations and to really make a dent in the HIV epidemic. There is no one size fits all as far as we can tell so far, and that's not what we expect. So we really need to think about different types of products for use as PrEP. And then you'll hear me say this so many times that you will be probably quite sick and tired of the discussion of PK and PD relationships being important, and knowing that as early as we possibly can for any products that are coming forward in PrEP. So where are we now? As Ken has already mentioned, we're hopefully soon going to have results for the third tenofovir gel study, so the coital use of topicals. We are either already into and or about to begin phase 2 safety testing, clinical testing of two long-acting injectables, the TMC-278 long-acting preparation, as well as the GSK-744. And then long-acting topicals. Now, we are now supporting the ASPIRE study, which is the dapivirine intravaginal ring. That's in efficacy testing, and we're hoping for results either late 2015 or early 2016. And I, as Ken was talking, realized that I was very remiss in not putting up the HPTN 069 study, which is looking at, it's a phase 2, expanded phase 2 study looking at safety of Maraviroc for PrEP. So I apologize for that. Where might we be going? And some of this work has already started and is in the early stages, but I wanted us to just kind of consider, again, not an exhaustive list, but some of the major work or major modalities that we're looking at moving forward for PrEP. Vaginal films. Certainly easy to use and less shorter acting than maybe the monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly sorts of products that we're looking at in the long-acting injectables as well as others. Pod intravaginal rings. We're hoping that these intravaginal rings, they will have the ability to put various products in, and we have less because they're separated, just as the name suggests, into pods within those rings, that we have less problem, hopefully, with compatibility of different drugs and due to separation in the ring. Implants. They're already used in contraception. Could they be used as PrEP? We're certainly hoping so. And they're very convenient, obviously, for long-term use. One of the advantages is that they're relatively easily removed if a person decides, okay, I really don't want to use this anymore, or if we run into adverse effects. Transdermal. For a long time I have been asking, can't we get a patch that, again, is easily put on, easily taken off if need be? For quite a long time we've thought that that was nigh on to impossible because of the amount of drug needed to be able to load. For any patch less than half the size of your body, it seemed not doable, which did not seem to be a practical approach. But now there is some thought that we might be able to do this, and people are starting to work in this area and think about it. Long-acting tablets, again, thought, okay, if you can get 12 hours, 24 hours, 36, 48 hours out of a tablet, that is probably about as good as it gets in most cases. But there are folks who are now thinking, no, it might actually be doable. And, we might get some long-term tablets. So we really are hopeful in that regard. Multipurpose prevention technologies is a whole category that we're hopeful is going to be useful in both the PrEP field and potentially in contraception. So what do I mean by that? Using multiple different modes for prevention. And as you can see here, we're focusing right now largely, at least in our group, on products for HIV prevention as well as contraception. But you're also hopeful that in the future you might also be able to add other STI prevention into those modalities. And there are multiple options, we hope, that might be able to deliver these multipurpose prevention technologies. The intravaginal rings, potentially IUDs, implants, and possibly even eventually long-acting injectables. Do monoclonal antibodies have a place in the prevention field, and specifically a place as PrEP? We really don't know at this point. The concept is yet to be proved, and we really need to start to work on that and do that in a timely and efficient manner. Now, as most of you realize, there are issues with being able to practically implement monoclonal antibodies, even if they worked, at this point in time. But we are hopeful that there'll be able to be improvements. And cost being one thing, large volume, either IV or sub-Q injections are another problem with the current formulations. Need for monthly infusions. But everyone who's working in that field realizes that those are obstacles that will need to be overcome to have any practical usage. So if it looks like there is a prevention benefit, then certainly, hopefully, those things can be dealt with. But something that we need to keep in mind as we survey the PrEP field. So, problems that we have already experienced and will likely continue to experience, and there's certainly more than what I can touch on today. The first issue, again, back to PK and PD, is potential differences in drug levels between the female reproductive tract and the rectal compartment. We've certainly seen that in some of the products that we already have looked at, and I think could reasonably expect that we would have some differences in the products going forward. So we really need good PK information to understand that. For products to be useful, hopefully both for men and women. Acceptability, what does that really mean? We've talked for years about products needing to be acceptable, and we've asked questions like, would you use this product if it were available to you? And got back lots of yes answers many times. 70%, 80%, 90% of people in trials will say, yes, I would use this product. And then, unfortunately, even within the trials, it hasn't always translated to actual usage. So we've got to better define what does acceptability really mean, and we certainly have to get a lot better at assessing that. Now, that's not to say that the efforts thus far have not been valiant and then that we haven't done what we thought was reasonable, but we've got to reconsider that part moving forward, because if it's not acceptable, no matter how effective it is, it won't be practical to implement. Adherence, as you heard from the previous panel and have heard probably ad infinitum over the last couple years in the discussion of the PrEP trials, adherence is key. Again, no matter how well something works, if folks won't adhere, it really won't make a difference. So we've got to better understand that initial decision-making process. What is the calculus, if you will, to actually that people go through to decide, okay, I'm going to even initially commit to use of this product. And then can we positively influence that in any way for those at high risk of HIV infection? And then if folks do commit, what is the support that's needed for adherence for long term? And is that feasible? It has to be feasible to implement in healthcare systems that are oftentimes, as Ken said earlier, oftentimes already overburdened. So we have to think practically. So how might we resolve some of these problems? How do we refine the map of how we get to that optimized end game? Again, I will say PK/PD important early on. I think, I know that we're working on, as are several other groups, kind of setting ideal properties and not necessarily, there's a target product profile, and you've probably heard a lot of talk about that, TPPs, and that oftentimes is product specific to help through the development pathway with a specific product. But what we need to say, what we at NIH feel like we need to say is, okay, as we did when we first started talking about PrEP overall, kind of an ideal set of properties for candidates that would come forward. And at that time we were thinking, largely restricted to daily use or potentially coital use. Now we're thinking longer term. So what are the ideal properties for a long-acting injectable, for an intravaginal ring, for MPTs, for implants, any of these other modalities, and we're really working at that. And part of those include things, they're broad categories. They help us hopefully decide what investments to make in taking products forward. When you get to the end of phase 2, you know the safety data, you know something about the PK/PD, hopefully. How do you decide what to invest? Because we're talking about tens of millions of dollars for an efficacy trial. And then, of course, implementation, and that includes broad categories such as, that really talk about the effectiveness, but the cost, the potential cost effectiveness, the ease of use, the ability to fit within existing healthcare systems. The second thing I think we need to do, and this was really brought home to me in a meeting that I was in a couple weeks ago, is we've really got to reconsider the questions that we are asking in clinical trials. And again, not for lack of trying. I think it's an evolution. And, it really struck me as an example, one of the young women was saying, well, as a young woman, when you ask me, do I have, because we often ask things, we're trying to understand participants' lives, how products might be used. We often say things like, do you have a primary partner? What does that mean, particularly for an 18 or 21-year-old or, 25 or 30. That probably means different things to different people, and it changes, and it probably changes over the length of a trial, even certainly length of people's lifetime. We've got to think about how we're asking some of the questions so that we really understand the context as well as potential product use. And then we have this wonderful multidisciplinary team that we have developed over the years that includes clinicians, trialists, behavioral scientists, statisticians, methodologists. But we've got to probably go some steps further. We really need to further expand that multidisciplinary team if we really want to understand how we might use PrEP. And so I've put just a few examples. This isn't meant to be all inclusive. I mean, demographers. This is not something that we automatically think of when we think of designing a clinical trial. But demographers help us understand population dynamics. Who migrates? What are the migration patterns? How might that actually affect the migrants' risk for HIV infection? Behavioral economists to help us understand decision-making much better than we do at this point. Anthropologists to help us understand both the cultural context as well as actual lived experiences of the participants, and community. And what do I mean here? Because there have been wonderful dialogue with community over the years. What I'm saying is we have to continue in our evolution of that, and I think we have to get much more specific about tell us your stories. Tell us doing the research, designing the trial, your stories so that we better understand how to position these products and if they're even feasible depending on the product. And so, kind of what is big picture sort of way forward, at least, as I see it. We've got to be bold yet discerning in our choices, in our prioritization of products and strategies. And those are kind of opposing forces or ways of thinking. But I think that we have to try and hit that sweet spot. There's much less money, and there's an urgency to actually get usable products out. So what do I mean by that? Push the boundaries. We've got to think creatively. I mean, you've already heard me say there are things that a year ago, 5 years ago, folks said just not possible that we now think is possible. So question that. Question the status quo at all times. But then we really need to use objective criteria to select those products. And then when we come to, our points in the pathway to down select, what we cut is as important as what we keep. And then keep in mind that there are always opportunity costs. If we support one product or strategy, then that means that there's something else that we're not going to be able to fund. So you have to be thinking highest priority, highest impact moving forward. And then we got to make prevention cool. I don't know how to do it. I personally think it's really cool, or obviously I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing, and most of you do as well. But to the larger audience, not just talking to ourselves, to the audience of folks who really need HIV prevention modalities. How do we work with marketers and media experts to really, bring them into the multidisciplinary team and really hopefully influence desire? I mean, bottom line, just look at the launch of the iPhone 6. Now, I'm not saying that we have an iPhone, but how excited people are, and so many things that we could live without that we desire greatly because of the marketing and positioning in the market. We've got to do some of that work with our prevention products to really influence desire. And so, we've come a really long way, made great strides. We've got to maintain our old friendships and make new friends. And to borrow from a poet that I love, Robert Frost, who hopefully is not freaking out somewhere there in the great beyond that I changed his pronoun here, because this really is a we endeavor, so I felt compelled. but to just kind of say where at least it feels like to me that we are in HIV prevention. The woods are lovely, dark, and deep, but we have promises to keep, and miles to go before we sleep, and miles to go before we sleep. Thank you very much for listening, and I want to thank the other members of the Prevention Science Program. Thanks. And I assume it's okay to take questions at this point? Okay.
Hi, Ross Cranston, University of Pittsburgh and the United Kingdom. Thanks, Cheryl. That was great. You didn't mention the development of rectal microbicides and as a prevention modality. And I really just want to acknowledge the great contribution of the NIH, both to the program over the last 10 to 15 years, and particularly to MTN 017, the phase 2 rectal microbicide study that's currently enrolling and almost completely enrolled, actually. So thank you to the NIH.
Yeah, thanks so much for bringing that up. You know, I live with, so I apologize for that. You know, I live with the idea that that's assumed, but clearly it isn't, and I should have stated that a bit more explicitly. We certainly are very supportive, and you know, when I was talking about this, I'm thinking, yes, I talked some about vaginal use, but I was automatically thinking about products that can be used rectally as well, so apologies for that.
Hi, Cheryl. Ian McGowan, University of Pittsburgh. So, it's the Pittsburgh focus here.
Yeah, I started to say, yeah.
What? It's 18, yeah. So, great. This meeting is all about oral antiretrovirals, clearly. And I think, you know, there's a lot to be done, whether it's treatment as prevention or antiretrovirals orally as PrEP. And it's totally understandable that people really want to try and turn this opportunity into reality and roll it out. But some things I think we just have to acknowledge. We've learned through studies like Voice that particularly for young women in Africa, oral PrEP probably ain't going to work. It's really not. There is huge stigma about taking home a bottle of Truvada if you're living in a township in Soweto. I don't know if James or others much better qualified than me to comment about that. So we do need these other technologies that Cheryl's beautifully discussed this morning, be it injections or intravaginal rings or topical agents. So I don't think they should be, I mean, clearly they're underrepresented in your program, but I'm just arguing very strongly that these are not marginal issues. These are real products which may be transformative, particularly, I think, the intravaginal ring. And so I think perhaps when you have your next meeting and you're talking about antiretrovirals for PrEP, it would be great maybe to sort of just bring up a little bit more the topical and the other modalities of administration.
Well, clearly, yes, I think they're important, as you see the time that we spent in the talk. And, you know, and I should have prefaced the talk also with saying, you know, at least in my mind, in our mind, in the Prevention Science Program, it's not only oral or systemic, but the topicals are PrEP as well and, you know, really need consideration.
Hi. Absolutely fascinating stuff. I've got a couple comments, if that's all right. I mean, I personally think that the various the range of technological options that you're laying out aren't just fascinating on the practical level. They're fascinating on the social level because, you know, talking about rolling this out, let's just assume that it's possible and it's happened that we roll PrEP, right? That we, you know, it's rolled out and everyone has it and all that sort of thing. I mean, there's a real over-focus on the part of all the people that we've seen here over the last couple of days to look just at the individual in the healthcare system. But, you know, customs officers, school nurses, university nurses, the workplace, right? Mm-hmm. The prisons. I mean, you're talking about, you know, washing society and a range of institutions that I don't think have been considered with all of these technologies. And so you have to imagine if you've got, for example, you know, holiday season and 1 out of every 10 people going to Thailand has got this stuff in their suitcase going through customs, right? I mean, you know, nobody's really connecting the dots and looking at the range of institutions through which somebody on these medications or technologies would have to pass, including children. and the school nurse issue and that sort of thing. And so I think that I'm just making a humble suggestion that, as you think about rolling these things out, that to look beyond, right, simply the healthcare delivery outfit and the individual and perhaps, a bar with a sex theme. That we're talking about a constant use of these things amongst people who are going to be passing through a range of institutions. So that's my first thing. I personally, I think it's absolutely fascinating. And the second thing is that, speaking as a sociologist, health economists and anthropologists are not the only people who can help. And if you want to look at decision making in terms of medication, just perhaps you should call a sociologist. We can be of use as well. So just in
Absolutely.
terms of, okay, thanks.
Are we? Okay, thank you very much.